Hello, my name is Kieran Walsh and I'm Professor of Ageing and Public Policy at NUI Galway and the Director of the Irish Centre for Social Gerontology. Thank you very much for joining us for this really important policy event on extended working life and pensions. The purpose of which is really to present preliminary findings from the Irish strand of the cross-national DAISIE project on the views of older workers in the financial sector and the healthcare sector on the proposed increases in relation to state pension age. A secondary purpose and a really important element of this is to discuss and debate these findings with key stakeholders who are both panelists as a part of today's programme and members of our audience. But to begin, I'm delighted to be able to invite the President of NUI Galway, Professor Ciaran O'Hertig, to open this event and to give his welcome.
Thanks, Ciaran. Good morning, agus tá mé an host of Seanad Éireann. I'm very pleased to be here to open this particular event this morning in a particularly important seminar and body of work in the context of the university's mission, our values, where we see ourselves in the world. Because as a university, we are committed to the public good, first of all. And clearly there is a contribution here to the public good in the context of the intergenerational challenges and the challenges for a particular generation of changes in work, changes in pension policy, changes in the potential of their own life course. And I'm particularly pleased that this is being hosted by the Institute for Life Course and Society and the Irish Centre for Study in this area for the Irish Centre for Social Gerontology. And particularly in this particular area, as I say, this is particularly important as a contribution to the public good. Secondly, we're very keen as a university and committed to values which are again part of this particular seminar and this particular body of work, values such as respect, openness, excellence and sustainability. And this is across all of these values speak to this work. Respect for those in society who are affected by policies and policy change, respect for the evidence through doing excellent research as in this context, respect for also for sustaining other and new generations, also older generations in their role in society. And very often in the current context, we've thought of the challenges for a younger generation, particularly as a university, we see this. But I'm particularly pleased that we're now also, and we also look more generally at challenges for other generations, not only in the current context of COVID, but in this particular context of policy change, and recognizing that there's no monopoly, if you like, on challenge, that challenges are across the generations, and particularly for this group of workers who are faced with changes which may extend their working lives, may curtail their pension obligations, but also their access to pensions. All of those things are particularly important in the context of sustaining that particular generation and respecting them in their context. And then thirdly, particularly important in the overall context of the university's mission, the university's view of itself, is that this is a very open webinar in a number of ways. First of all, in its inclusiveness as regards the setting in which it is. Secondly, as a policy making and a policy formation discussion, I think this is a particularly important role of the university and one which I commend all our colleagues for taking part in. We are particularly keen as a university that we have an impact on policy, and research such as this does that. And research such as this, which involves other stakeholders as we have in this seminar, I think is particularly important for us in that engaging with the research and engaging with others in the context of this research, whether employers, workers, trade unions, and those affected by these changes. This is a particularly important element of how we see public policy evolving, and also for policymakers themselves, those in public service and those who are involved in designing and shaping policy. There is a role for universities in informing such policy with good evidence, with good research, and with open and good discussions such as this. And then thirdly, I think this also represents a transnational challenge, and therefore the involvement of colleagues from other universities internationally, expertise beyond our shores is also, I think, evidence and an exemplar of that openness to other perspectives, which I think is particularly important in research more generally, but as a hallmark of NUI Galway and our approach to research in this and other contexts. So I'm particularly pleased, therefore, to be here to welcome you to this seminar, to introduce the work that's being done here, important work in the context of profound implications for members of our society. Secondly, important work in the context of research on its implications, but thirdly, important work in then how we shape policy and how that policy has an impact on the lives of those to which the policy is directed, to whom the policy facilitates, and in particular the evidence base provided here, which is always the good basis for good policy, and I'm particularly pleased that NUI Galway contributes to that in many ways, and particularly grateful to colleagues for their contribution in that regard. So Grameen Mahagif to my anna hosta veliv inu agus guim gakra hariv niawan shinabertar shulu givenu akanabertar shulu gamakcha freshen agus to my sul le Disborg Brever agus the Disborg meg Geneva freshen o have policy de. Thank you all very much and I wish you the very best. Thank you.
It's great. Thank you very much, President, for those very thoughtful words of welcome, and thank you for giving us your time to open this event today. So on behalf of the Irish Centre for Social Gerontology, I would like to add my own welcome to all of you as well. The DAISIE project and the findings you will hear today really reflect the central mission of our centre in so many ways, which is to integrate the lived experience of diverse groups of older people into research and public policy development. So projects such as this not only help to nurture a more complete understanding of later life and public policy, but endeavour to really inform more relevant and impactful policy interventions to improve people's lives. And as a part of a strong cross-national study that adopts a life course approach, as the President highlighted, this project also points to how these sorts of public policy issues can be really shared across countries and can be really shared across lives. So it really focuses in on that notion of linked lives in a policy and in a social context. But the DAISIE project also addresses one of the most significant challenges facing developed aging societies, and that is how to ensure the sustainability and the efficacy of pension systems while bolstering our capacity to deliver equity in working life and retirement experiences, and capturing the voices and perspectives of older workers and key stakeholders from different sectors, from different backgrounds, is very much instrumental to addressing this challenge. As countries negotiate their economic and social recovery from COVID-19 and view some of the challenges of demographic aging with that lens, keeping those voices to the fore is really critical. And that is why today's stakeholder event is really important to us and to the project. And it's also very timely given the forthcoming Pensions Commission report as well. So it can certainly be argued that older workers have been somewhat overlooked during the last 18 months, and any planned recovery strategies really need to keep equity as a central underpinning value. Otherwise, we do risk societal issues and these policy issues becoming more entrenched, and a legacy of disadvantage for these and some other groups as well. So it's for all of these reasons that I want to congratulate Anya de Lema as PI of the Irish Research Strand and Nicky Lefebvre as the PI of the International Project on the work that they've put together. And I'm delighted to chair the opening portion of this event. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists who are taking part. We very much value their contribution and value their time. And I think certainly the work will be better for their contribution to today's session as well. So if we can switch to the next slide, please, if you don't mind. That's great. So we have a very stimulating afternoon ahead of us, which is divided into essentially three parts. First, we will hear about the background and context of extended working lives and the rationale for the international project. Second, an overview of the Irish strand of work and preliminary policy relevant findings will be presented. And finally, we will have a policy roundtable in response to these findings and the challenge that is ahead as well. So to begin, can I invite Nicky Lefebvre to present on the background and context? So Nicky, if you are able to share your screen. And Nicky is a professor of sociology at the University of Lausanne, where she is Vice Dean for Gender Equality in Early Academic Careers at the Faculty of Social and Political Science. She has published extensively on the implications of women's entry into higher level occupations from a comparative and life course perspective. And as well as being PI of this project, she is Scientific Director of the Gender, Occupations and Mobility sub-project of the Swiss National Science Foundation Research Programme on Vulnerability across the life course. So Nikki, whenever you're ready, please start, and I'll give you a nod a couple of minutes before your time ends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kieran. Thank you, and hello to everyone. I'm delighted to be able to join you just for a short time of this very important policy event. I hope you can see my screen correctly, and the idea is I will just present to you very rapidly the rationale behind the DAISIE project, and then leave the floor to Seanad Éireann, who will be presenting some of our preliminary results and discussing the policy implications. So DAISIE stands for the Dynamics of Accumulated Inequality of Seniors in Employment. It's a research project that was is cross-national, as Kieran Walsh just mentioned. And as in most European cross-national studies, we've taken the most diverse and most similar perspective. So we have teams from obviously the National University of Ireland. We also have teams from the Czech Republic, from the UK, spanning Edinburgh to Kent, so you can't get much broader than that. A team from the University of Karlstad in Sweden, and then my team I'm heading up in Lausanne. And when I say most dissimilar and most similar, we have in that spread of countries, 3 countries that are generally considered to be relatively similar in their kind of liberal political liberal economic organization, and then one Eastern European country, ex-Soviet regime, and one Nordic country. So the idea was to be able to compare the liberal countries between each other and also to get the broader comparative perspective. Just a few words about the context within which this research has been funded. Norface is the funder, and Norface is a partnership of national research funding agencies. And every 3 years, they launch a program. The program we responded to was entitled DIAL, Dynamics of Inequality Across the Life Course, Structures and Processes. And you can well imagine that with the interest the NUI Galway and the University of Lausanne have in life course research, this was perfect opportunity for us to apply our sort of preoccupations with life course issues and aging in the framework of a European funded project. And there were actually only 13 projects funded in the whole of Europe within this DIAL program, of which DAISIE is one. So very briefly, the aims and objectives of this project, I would say that we already know a fair amount. We always need more research, but we know quite a bit about national and international policy initiatives in favor of extended working lives. We know slightly less about policies in favor of aging at work, accompanying older workers. So this was one of the things we wanted to explore in more depth, as I said, from this cross-national comparative perspective. But we realized in our previous collaborations that were fairly numerous, is that we have very little research about occupational and organizational level policies and practices with regard to aging at work and with regard to retirement, especially the transition to retirement. So the main aim of the DAISIE project was really to put organizational and occupational variations on the agenda. And of course, this is complex because we wanted to look at particular occupations and compare them across countries. And we also wanted to look within countries at the differences and similarities between occupations within a single national context. We decided, therefore, to focus on 3 occupations that were selected basically, firstly, I would say, because of their contrasting gender composition. So we chose finance, health and transport because these are occupations where women's share of employment varies quite considerably. Women dominating the health sector, men dominating the transport sector, finance being more of a gender mixed occupation. Also because these are occupations where the challenges to health and work-life balance are slightly different. A lot of research has been carried out in recent years on the stress faced by workers in the finance sector, and we have more work on threats to physical health in the health sector and in the transport sector. So we thought these would be interesting occupations, looking at different kinds of issues in relation to work-life balance, particularly in later life. So grandparenting coming in as a big issue, general issues of well-being and health. And we decided to use biographical interviews and life grids as our main tool. I'll say a little more about that in a minute. And under all European research projects nowadays, there is indeed a strong encouragement to disseminate findings beyond the academic confines, to organize workshops, to organize conferences, and to publish policy briefs. And these are all the things that we are undertaking within the DAISIE project. And indeed, the policy event of today comes under that heading and is very important for us in obtaining feedback and insights into issues that we may have overlooked in the course of our research. So in order to carry out our comparative study, this is a 3-year project, so we're fairly long term. We adopted what in sociological jargon we call a multi-level mixed methods comparative research design. So as I said, we obviously started with a systematic analysis of existing policies and compared these across countries. We then looked at existing survey data, including the European Working Conditions Survey, which is based in Dublin at Eurofound. We looked at the survey of health, aging and retirement in Europe, and we tried to find as much background data as we could into the different patterns of extended working life and retirement at the national levels in our 5 countries. But our most important contribution to the state of the art has been our occupational case studies, as I said, in the 3 contrasting sectors. And at the present time, we are elaborating policy briefs based on our research data. So just to say a little bit more about these occupational case studies, I know that Anya will be coming back to this from the Irish perspective shortly. We have now collected a lot of qualitative data. We've carried out over 440 interviews with older male and female workers in these 3 sectors, and we are in the process of producing English language summaries of these interviews, because one of our challenges is, of course, to be a multilingual project. We've carried out about 60 expert interviews with human resource managers, with line managers, but also with trade union representatives and other organizations that are involved in the aging at work issues. And we are now in the process of carrying out our comparative qualitative data analysis. I just wanted to mention one of the innovative data collection tools that we've adapted to the needs of the project. And also, I will give you some details later on of our final conference, which took place online, but in Sweden last month. And there are papers and information available about the papers that were presented there. But firstly, this is one of our innovative data collection tools. This is a life grid. This is a way of retracing the life course experiences of the older workers that we meet in the course of our interviews. And in order to make this data collected comparable and analyzable across countries, we have used stickers so that even if the interview took place in Swedish or in Czech, we can retrace major events in the life course and look at how these affect the conditions under which 50+ workers envisage extending or not extending their working lives, and the financial conditions under which they prepare themselves for retirement. Already available from the project are a number of national policy reports, also reports on EU and OECD policy levels. So if you're interested in those, please don't hesitate. They are downloadable from our website. And as I said, the DAISIE final conference took place at the end of May, and we have a number of papers available on request from the presentations that took place there. So with no more ado, I wish you an enjoyable policy event. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stay until the end, but I'm very interested in receiving your feedback, and I know that Anya Nielemi will be transmitting your comments and ideas back to us and back to the whole research team very shortly. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the session, and I look forward to hearing more about your comments shortly. Thank you, Kieran. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Nikki, and thanks very much for keeping such a succinct overview. Great and very helpful to set the context. So we're going to move straight on to our next presentation now. So if I can ask Anya just to share your screen. And essentially Anya is going to present on the overview of the Irish strand of work, which sits within that broader international project, and to also then focus in on some preliminary policy relevant findings from both the healthcare and the financial sector as well. So while Anya is getting ready there, Anya, I can say a few words about Anya. So Anya is a principal investigator for the Irish strand of the DAISIE project, but she's also deputy director of the Irish Centre for Social Gerontology. She was chair of the cost action on gender and extended working life policies, and certainly that cost action was very prevalent across lots of its activities over the last 4 or 5 years, with over 141 researchers from 34 different countries. So she's broad interest in relation to aging, but much of her recent work has been focused on gender, older workers, and extended working life. So Anya, please, whenever you're ready, please start off.
Okay, thanks very much, Kieran. So good afternoon and welcome to everybody, and thank you to all the panelists for participating. We're really appreciated. So first I want to thank the president of NUI Galway for opening the event, Nikki, Professor Nikki Lefebvre, for outlining the international aspects of the DAISIE project, and Kieran for his introduction. I'd also like to thank the men and women who participated in the project and gave generously of their time and shared their experiences and knowledge with us, whether as workers, employers, or trade union representatives. I'd also like to thank Christine and Maggie O'Neill for help with organizing the event. And I'd like to acknowledge the project funding by Norface and the Irish Research Council. So my presentation today discusses the perspectives of older workers in 2 different sectors, financial and healthcare sectors, on the proposed increases in state pension age in Ireland. So this is an overview of the presentation. I'm going to talk about the DAISIE project in Ireland, briefly mention the theoretical approach, outline some national pensions and employment policy and some sectoral policies, then outline the methods, the profile of the workers and the findings, and then give some policy recommendations, their policy recommendations, and just some of the implications of that more generally. Yeah. So so as Nikki has informed you, the Irish strand it's just one of 5 countries in the study, and it involves interviews with 63 older workers aged 50 and over to date, because we're still actually conducting interviews. It also involves interviews with 10 employers and trade union representatives or HR people across the relevant sectors. And today I'm going to present the findings just based on the interviews with the workers, the interviews with the experts, and will be analysed subsequent to this event today. So we have interviewed 63 older workers altogether, and 40 in the healthcare sector, 16 in the financial sector, and the interviews in the transport sector are actually still ongoing. So briefly, the theoretical approach we take in this study is the gendered political economy of aging approach. This emphasizes the impact of the economy, legislation, and gendered social norms regarding caring for children and other family members. So when analyzing the interview data, then we adopt a life course approach. So we take into consideration things that happened earlier in people's lives, the impact of families, their location and time and place, and also the institutional context, which includes both national and employer policies. So again, just to quickly outline the policies designed to extend working life, I'm going to focus mainly on the increase in state pension age. So it's currently age 66 in Ireland, and it was planned to increase it to age 67 in 2021 and age 68 in 2028. And so that was the case when we started the project. Currently, these proposed increases have been suspended until the Pensions Commission, which was set up by the government after the election in 2020. That's due to report later this month. So we'll see what the recommendations are from that. So just to say that it doesn't directly affect people with a purely occupational pension, and it affects people on lower pensions and part-time workers in particular. Workers in the public sector can now work up to age 70. But private sector workers, their retirement age is generally set out in their employment contract. So I want to mention family-friendly policies in Ireland. So historically, there have been discriminatory policies. For example, the marriage bar that encouraged or compelled women to leave the workforce when they got married. That affects some of the workers in this study. Now, however, there are a wide range of family-friendly policies with paid and unpaid maternity leave, paternity leave, and parental leave. And there are pension credits for caring for, there's a homemaker scheme, which is not retrospective, though, prior to 1994. So again, that would affect some of the workers. But there's poor provision of public childcare, and private childcare is expensive. So the result of all this is that women tend to have a lower level or lower amount of private and occupational pensions than men. So now I want to look at employer policies for workers in the financial sector. So they have all the usual statutory policies, maternity, paternity, parental and carers leave. They also can have flexible working, for example, part-time work, but it's often difficult to access for those in branch banking in particular. So that's often given on a business basis or subject to the needs of the business, I should say. There are no specific policies for older workers in terms of extra leave or anything like that. There are some wellness initiatives, for example, seminars on the menopause, things like that. There's retirement age is quite early normally, so there's a sort of a normalized retirement age of 63 for longer serving employees, and more recent employees, it's age 65. But in the banks, the traditional banks, many of them employees leave early. There were many rounds of voluntary severance. So if we turn to look at employer policies for HSE nurses, because all of the healthcare sector workers, when I say healthcare workers, I mean nurses, so I'll use the two terms interchangeably during the talk. So historically, one of the things that was mentioned a lot was a lack of appropriate manual handling training or appropriate equipment like hoists or lifts. And so this meant that quite a few of the nurses had injuries to their backs or hips or knees. There are current policies for older workers. There's one actually that was mentioned quite a lot by people. It's a pilot pre-retirement initiative and that is available to frontline staff, and that means they can work half-time for 5 years before they retire and have full pension rights for that period. So that was, well, I'll talk a bit about that later on. Then there are the usual policies for all workers, statutory leaves. Flexible work is available. Again, this can be a bit problematic in acute hospitals and some settings where there are staff shortages. It's not always easy to get these flexible arrangements. Retirement, again, nurses can, especially the longer serving ones, can retire early or retire at 60 or before if they have paid additional voluntary contributions, and the later recruits, their retirement age is 65, but now all of them can work to age 70 if they wish. So trying to look at project recruitment and topics. So most people were recruited by invitation emails issued through either unions or employers. There were interviews were conducted, and Nikki has told you about the life grids, so I won't go into that. I also want to say that all of the data is that anybody gives us is anonymized, and pseudonyms are used even in this talk. So the topics that we asked people about were their work-life history and about their current work and how they felt about that, their plans for promotion and retirement, and their family. So it was really a work-life interview, their family and their health trajectories across the life course. The subject of today's talk really is their perspectives on the increase in state pension age and working longer. So the interviews were started in July 2019, and then there was a major interruption in 2020 with the pandemic, and we've actually started interviewing people again. And we're currently interviewing people in the transport sector mainly. We have completed all the health sector interviews. So the financial sector participants, we had 16 financial sector workers aged 50 or over, 11 women and 5 men. Most were employed in the major traditional banks, and a few were in private financial companies. So this is a profile of the financial sector workers. So you can see that they range in roles from bank officials and senior bank officials to managers. And then there are some people working in HR and different areas. Then the age group, there are very few, as you see, workers aged 60 to 64, only 3. That's, as I mentioned already, this kind of a culture of earlier retirement in the banks. Okay, so, and now the healthcare sector participants who are all nurses, there were 24 women and 16 men. Most are aged 50 or over, with a few being aged 45 or over. Most are employed by the health service executive. So the profile of the workers then, there were a wide range of workers, ranging from staff nurses in a variety of settings, from public health to acute settings, and then to assistant directors of nursing, and they were again across a range of settings. So the age group, there are some older nurses there, as you see, from age 60 plus. But again, there's a lot of people retire early and want to retire early. So for the financial sector workers, generally their health was good, and several, however, report that the job is stressful. So, and they attribute that to the change in the culture of banks and to the introduction of automation and there were large reductions in the number of staff, the emphasis on selling products and kind of pressure to sell. None of these workers were engaged in shift work. Most planned to retire at age 63 or earlier, and a few plan to stay on for financial reasons or because they enjoy the job and they feel able to continue. That they were very much in the minority. So the health challenges then for the healthcare sector workers or the nurses, they had very, there was very pronounced difference between them and the financial sector workers. So many of them had poor health, and these were work-related chronic conditions. So injuries to backs or hips or knees, and stress was the other big thing reported, with a few people also mentioned the menopause as something that was very difficult for them. These health challenges really depended a lot on the area of work that people were in. So it could be admissions or accident and emergency places. Those were usually very stressful. People who worked in, say, stroke units or places where they had to do a lot of lifting earlier in the career, they also had a lot of musculoskeletal injuries. Over half of the nurses worked shifts, and that is something that is recognised to be difficult for older workers as well. Many of them plan to retire at or before 60 to have healthy time in retirement, or else because they find it too difficult to continue. The older nurses have defined benefit pensions. More recent employees tend to have defined contribution plus the state pension. They can also get a supplementary pension. So the perspectives on increasing state pension age from financial sector workers. So those holding negative or strongly negative views, 7 people have those. Mixed views, that's where they both give some positive reaction to it, but they also have a negative view as well. And then one person had a purely positive view of increasing state pension age. So a lot of financial sector workers felt it was unfair to disrupt lifelong expectations and planning. These were the kind of themes that came up again and again. They felt people have worked for long enough by age 65, and that workers deserve some healthy years in retirement. So now I'm just going to show you some of the quotes to illustrate those. So this one here is about disrupting lifelong expectations and planning. So as Caroline said, we've been led to believe all our lives that our pension was there at 65, and we've worked for that and paid for that and put all our children through college and paid every single thing. So I'm not surprised that the government didn't get elected as a result of that. She's talking about the change in state pension age there. Quite a number of people felt that they'd worked for long enough at age 65. And as I said, they had a culture of retiring at 63. And so this woman said, I think it's terrible. I think 45 years is long enough to work. Most of the bank workers had started at age 18 or younger even. Another theme was that workers deserve healthy time in retirement. And I know from the literature that this is very common. This is something that people believe in other countries as well. So it's this idea, you get one chance at this life and you really should enjoy it, because most of that time is spent raising children, paying your mortgage, doing all that sort of responsibility. You want some time that's your own and you can enjoy it. So some people had mixed views. So for example, they felt that the opportunity to work is good for longer. But this woman, for example, is concerned about the gap between retirement age and state pension age. So her retirement age would be 63. So she says, well, I can see why the government did it, because they couldn't afford it. She's talking about pensions. But I think because they did, they have to allow them to work on, give us the opportunity to earn some money. If I retire at 63, I've got 5 years before this kind of kicks in, and it's a long 5 years to reach. So she was in that position because she was working part-time for many years. So she had a low occupational pension. And this woman had a positive view of the increase. So she said it's just inevitable that pension age will need to increase. So she mentions her father, who is nearly 90. He's been getting his pension for nearly 40 years. So she says it's inevitable. So now we turn to look at the perspectives of the healthcare sector workers on increasing state pension age. So most of them had, or over half of them anyway, had a negative view or very negative view. So they, about a third had, less than a third had mixed views, and 5 had a positive view. So the kind of themes that came up under negative views were the same ones as had already come up, I mentioned there, in the financial sector, plus, as you might expect, given the kind of work it is, they said that work is physically and emotionally demanding, and it's unrealistic. It's an unrealistic expectation to work past age 65. So some people also said that nurses should actually have an earlier retirement age, less than 65. And they mentioned the difficulties of continuing shift work to an older age. So this is a person who talks about the unrealistic, it's unrealistic to expect nurses to work longer. She says, I don't know how you'd be fit to work in this job until you're 70. It's too physically demanding, too emotionally demanding. You're under threat of physical violence every day. I just think you couldn't possibly do it until you're 70. I think you'd end up with bad health as a result of it. I don't think you could do it. So she worked in an A&E for a number of years. This was another view that was expressed quite a bit. Difficult to work even to 65 in frontline nursing. I think even 65 is very difficult for nurses. I feel that we've been taken a little bit for granted as a group. And I feel like I say, look at a guard or Garda and their retirement age. So she feels nurses should have a younger retirement age. There was the idea that shift work is more difficult with age. This was a nurse in an emergency department, and she or he finds that he thinks it's very difficult to even work until 60, he anticipates. He says there's no way you could be 70 or 65 working full-time in there. You can't. Doing shift work on it, no way. Not 65, daft. Even shift work at 60. I'm looking at doing that. What am I going to do? And if I can't do it even when I'm 58, I'm going to stop doing nights. I just get sick, so I won't do it anymore. And healthcare workers also had very mixed views. So this woman, she also understands about the need to increase state pension age and to have, to be able to pay for state pensions. But she questions, she said, I suppose then there's a cohort who are maybe a lot younger and they know they're going to be working a lot longer in life. And yeah, there would be a lot of discussion about whether they'd be physically able to do it. So that came up again and again. Others mentioned that it should be a choice. You shouldn't have to, but the choice should be there. But then equally, the choice should therefore be there to be able to reduce your hours or job share, because then definitely people might be able to work until they're 70, but not work 40 hours a week. Some of the healthcare workers had positive views. So again, there were the same ones as were expressed in the financial sector, plus they said it's good to have the opportunity to work longer. People are living longer and it's a long time to be retired. Older workers have a lot of experience to offer. So therefore, that to the workplace, and that there are social, mental and physical business benefits to working. But just to note that a lot of these positive views refer to really the benefit of working, of extending working, or facilitating people to work longer, not really referring to raising of state pension age. This nurse had said because of longevity, potentially people will be living a long time in retirement. Well, I think it's good if people want to or if they need to, because we're living longer and people spend a lot of time retired, And this was the idea that older workers have a lot to offer. And this was actually in both sectors. So this man says, I think it's a great idea. I know some people who actually didn't want to retire when they hit 65 and they were forced to. And for them, they felt it was a disgrace. They still had a lot to contribute. So again, this is an argument for facilitating people to work longer, not necessarily for increasing state pension age. So this is kind of a summary of some of the recommendations from financial sector workers. So they felt there should be more options for flexible working, that it's often difficult to get these flexible working options in practice when they apply for them. Financial sector workers should be facilitated to work until state pension age if they need to or wish to. And those who might need to work are people who worked part-time or took career breaks in relation to childcare earlier in life, or men and women who joined the bank later on and don't have full pensions. Working past state pension age should be a choice for workers generally. And for both of these sets of workers, actually, many of them did have occupational pensions. So some of their recommendations and their reactions were based on what happened to their relatives, or so they were talking about state pension age more generally, not only for themselves. Okay, so here are some recommendations from the healthcare workers. So there should be an option to reduce hours or have other flexible options towards retirement age. Again, that was, referring to that some people had difficulties in getting these flexible options. They recommended extending the pre-retirement pilot initiative to other workers in all roles, not only those in clinical roles, and partly because some people who were now either in managed roles or other roles had left clinical roles because they found it too stressful and difficult, and they would like to avail of these pre-retirement pilot initiative as well. Another recommendation was to provide non-shift work options for older nurses and to provide pathways into non-clinical roles for older workers. An earlier availability of pre-retirement courses. Some people were interested in that so that they could begin to prepare earlier on. So these are some draft policy recommendations, and we will be developing these as we go along, because we will be taking into account the views of the employers and trade unionists, and also there will be a section on transport workers as well. So government policy, working past state pension age should be a choice. That seems to be a very, very strong message coming through, not only from this project, but also from a previous project that I was involved in, where we looked at precarious workers and those healthcare assistants, and they don't have, many of them don't have occupational pensions. So they were really much more dependent on the state pension. And the idea of increasing it was very difficult for them. Exemptions from the proposed increases for those involved in physically demanding work, for example, healthcare and construction, especially for those without or with any occupational pensions or those with low occupational pensions. Employers' policies, extending the pre-retirement initiative and making it more accessible. Devising pathways for nurses to less physically demanding roles, and ensure flexible options are widely available in both sectors, and allowing workers in the private sector to continue working until state pension age. Okay, thanks very much for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, Áine. Thank you very much for keeping the time and for giving such a comprehensive overview of the findings. So we have some time for some questions now, and there are a couple just coming in. Let's see. So the first question here is, why is it that more women want to retire earlier than men?
Well, it's not always the case that more women want to retire earlier than men, but some of it is for reasons of caring or, caring for older family members. I didn't actually present on that here, but in fact, a very, very strong thing seems to be the kind of normalized retirement age. So I don't think there was a huge gender difference there. Whatever is the normal retirement age, that's when people tend to want to retire.
Okay, all right, great.
Between the banks earlier, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then there's two more here that we'll try and get through. So should we be looking at the issue of disability benefits for people who cannot continue working due to illness or due to work-related injury?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And some occupational or some employers have their own policies for people who do get injuries. The nurse, I'm sure Eddie will be able to tell us more about that, but there are policies where people can take time off, with full pay for 3 months and then another further 3 months. So, but yeah, and I think this is more important for people. Disability benefits are more important for people in kind of precarious occupations or places that don't have occupational pensions or good policies when people are laid off.
Okay. Great. So then there is two other questions that just come in here. So one is, should there be a scaling of state pension level linked to flexible retirement age to give a choice to different individuals at that point?
Yeah, I think that's something they do in Sweden. They have, like, people can retire between age 62 and 68. I think definitely I'd be very interested to hear what both the unions and the employers have to say about this, because I think that there's obviously a desire for flexible policies from the workers, in this project anyway. Yeah.
Okay, great. And so all the questions are coming in now, so I'm trying to keep abreast of them. So then there's one here from one of our panelists. So is the main issue for people the affordability because of the increase in state pension, or is it about the ability for people to work past their normal retirement age?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was an interesting distinction, because we asked specifically about what did people think of the increase in state pension age, but often they replied by saying they immediately jumped to, oh, it's great to have the opportunity to work longer. So yeah, I think the main issue really is for people who are, we'll say, in physically demanding jobs, they don't have an occupational pension and the state pension is raised. That's where it's really, really difficult, or if they only have a small occupational pension. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I was trying to bring out that distinction there, because we noticed that the answers we were getting were sometimes not about the question. Sometimes they were, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's understandable too how people would interpret it in that way. So we have another question here again, which is about flexibility in a different way, but it's an interesting situation because it's a little bit closer to home, I think, in that context. And the question is about, so I'll read it out in full. This person is saying that they're very conscious that they started proper work, in inverted commas, after their PhD at the age of 29, but their friend had been working for 12 years at that point, yet she will have to go as long for the state pension. Isn't there a case for state pension age kicking in after a certain amount of years as opposed to an age threshold?
Yeah, and that's definitely something that came up in the cost action that I was involved in. It's one of the proposals that people have. So I'd be very interested to hear actually what the panel have to say about that. Should it be like 40 years? And say in the US, you have 35 years to get your full Social Security. So that's an option, not linking it to age, but to a number of years worked. And certainly, some of the people I interviewed in the previous project, they would have started work at 13, 14, 15. They have worked for 50 years, so it really it seemed very unfair to change the pension age for people like that to 67 or 68. I'd already worked it for 50 years at 65. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose I'm just conscious of the time here, so I'll take one more question. And there's one here just in relation to, I suppose, a question that you kind of hit on at different points around the effects of COVID-19. And I suppose, does the research findings tap into those effects of COVID-19 in the pandemic, or did anybody raise those sorts of issues during the completion of the data collection?
Yeah, actually, we went back and asked some of the workers, the nurses, what had been the impacts of COVID-19, and it did have quite an effect, and it wasn't simple. For some people, they were very worried and they didn't want to be at work and they wanted to leave. They were going to leave earlier than they had planned to. They were going to retire earlier. For others, they were very torn because they wanted to leave, but they felt they should stay out of kind of duty and not leave people, their colleagues, in the lurch. And yeah, so it was quite complex. We're only beginning to analyze those that data at the moment. So yeah, but those were some of definitely of the. So
there's more there to explore and more to pull out, no doubt. Okay, and actually there is one last one here that I will put to you, just because it's come up a couple of times in some of the comments, and that's in relation to the demanding nature of different jobs. So you focused a lot on kind of the physical demanding nature. And at the start, Nikki mentioned the stressful elements relation to financial job. So this person is just wondering about that in terms of time pressure, in terms of these other kind of pressures that can impact on people in their working environments, and whether that is something that is coming up as well.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, you know, here I was trying to draw some of the contrast here between the workers, but definitely the bank workers mentioned stress. You know, they felt under real stress, and there was another interesting thing was kind of like that they were being monitored. They can see every move we make. You know, those kind of comments. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting data on. You know, the kind of pressures that people are under, and I do think, yeah, time stress is definitely one that's in a lot of occupations. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so there's a couple of other questions that I didn't get to, but I think what we'll do is...
I can answer those. Actually, I can type answers to them as well.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Anya, that would be great. So I think in the interest of time, what we'll do now is we'll just take a 5-minute comfort break, and I'll ask everybody to rejoin at 1:05 for what promises to be a really engaging panel discussion around this topic and around some of the issues that have come up already. So we'll see you in 5 minutes' time. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back, everybody. And now we're going to go into the second part of our session, which is the panel discussion, and which really brings in some of the key stakeholders within the different sectors, both across aging and employment. So I will hand over to our panel chair, who is Nata Duvvury. And Nata is the Director of Centre for Global Women's Studies here in NUI Galway. And she's an international development expert with extensive experience on issues of gender and the economy. She's particular focus of research is on older working women in the context of European policies to extend working life. So Nata, whenever you're ready, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you for that introduction. Welcome everyone to this policy roundtable. We have just heard the perspectives of employees with regard to the increase in the age of the state pension and thereby extending working life. We thought it is equally important to hear from the stakeholders who influence government policies on this very important topic of extending working life. So we have invited stakeholders from employers associations, labor unions, political parties, and NGOs who are all engaged on this very serious issue. And particularly in the context of the Pensions Committee's report that is about to come out. I'd like to first invite Tony Donoghue, who is the policy advisor of IBEC. Tony is the policy advisor with IBEC, which is the national representative body of Irish businesses and employers. He is the chair of the expert group on future skill needs and a member of the Pensions Commission, the Higher Education Authority, and the board of the European Centre for the Development of Vocational Training. He has served on the National Economic Council, Economic and Social Council, and on the boards of the National Qualifications Authority of Ireland and the Equality Authority. Tony, may I ask you to begin your presentation?
Thank you very much, Nata, and I will attempt to share my screen, and hopefully the technology will work. I'm taking it that everybody can see the screen. Thanks again for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to present to this important seminar. I found Anya's presentation really interesting, particularly in the context of the debate around both extended working lives and the state pension age. And there is a tendency to conflate both of those issues, but as Anya pointed out, they're not the same. The timing of the event is quite fortuitous from my point of view, because IBEC actively engaged with its membership in preparation for its submission to the Pension Commission, and apologies to any of those of you who might have participated in the public consultation, because some of these findings were actually initially shared with the Commission and on IBEC's submission, which is on our website. So we're also approaching this, and I'm approaching this consultation really around the sustainability challenges and the labour market issues around extending working life and the state pension age. The context is well known to you all. It's the increasing old age dependency ratio. In other words, the number of individuals aged 65 or over as a percentage of the working population. And as you'll see from this data from the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, this dependency ratio is due to increase at a fairly rapid rate. You could see, and expressing it in another way, that there are, at the moment, there are about 24 persons of pensionable age for every 100 persons of working age. In 30 years, that will be closer to 50 persons of pensionable age for every 100 workers. And 30 years is not that long away. So given that we run a pay-as-you-go pension system, there is a huge element of intergenerational fairness here. You've got a smaller number of workers supporting a rapidly extended pension population. Now, at one level, the solution to this is, sorry, I just make this point and quote the NESC report. There's a lot of debate about the extent of the so-called pension time bomb and a lot of different metrics around this, but I think this NESC comment captures it quite well. It suggests that although the precise amount of government expenditure required for older people cannot be projected or how it will be financed, it is clear that the underlying trend of more older people being supported by fewer younger people is a persistent pattern in all the projections, and this should be planned for. And the solution at one level is actually quite simple. We can either increase PRSI for employers and workers to fund this pension, this increasing pension bill, we can increase the age at which pensioners, which workers can receive the state pension, or we can reduce state pension benefits. And we actually put this choice to IBEC members, 300 companies, over 200 of which employed 250 staff. So it was a large cohort in terms of employment representation. And basically we gave them 3 choices and nothing else. And we asked them to rank them as first, second, and third. And you will see from this chart that there was very little appetite for reducing state pension benefits. And I think that's a fairly universally held view. The state pension is an important anti-poverty measure, and there's no appetite either politically, socially, or across the different stakeholders to reduce its benefits. And indeed, there's a feeling that benefits should be preserved, and that's government policy. The second and third choices are basically around increasing PRSI or other taxes, or increasing pension age, or a combination of both. And at one level, depending on the constituency, they're equally unpalatable choices. We also asked our members what their current practice is, and you'll see from these charts that over 80% still have a fixed retirement age, although almost 3/4 are actually retaining staff beyond the retirement age. And the provision that most are using for retaining staff is the use of post-retirement fixed-term contracts. There's a much smaller number using self-employed or consultancy arrangements. So that is the tool at the moment. We also asked our companies about the employer's right to fix a retirement age. Now, this is a contractual retirement age. There are, some political perspectives, and indeed the Citizens' Assembly suggested that specifying the retirement ages contractually should be outlawed completely. Employers shouldn't have the right to fix a retirement age. Now, there was very strong pushback in the survey to this notion. There was 2/3 believed it would have either an extremely negative, or a quite negative impact on their business. But, and this is a very important but, there was an acknowledgement, and we followed up the consultation, the survey with consultation. There was quite a realization and awareness of that gap between the retirement age, the contractual retirement age, and the state pension age. And that informed our response to the Pension Commission. And these are the key messages to the Pension Commission. One, that government should pursue a policy which links the state pension age with life expectancy, but that future increases should be introduced in a fair, transparent, and clear, understandable framework, which I would suggest the last proposal to increase the pension age to 67 from the beginning of this year, and which obviously prompted that political backlash, was not a good example. We also argue that employers' ability to fix mandatory retirement ages should be retained, but that government should provide legal support to recognise the alignment of contractual retirement ages with the state pension. And we've suggested to the Commission that they explore the possibility of setting a default retirement age at the same level of the state pension age. And this could be the minimum age at which employers can, if they choose to, set a mandatory retirement age. So this is an attempt to meet that gap. And then, because there are constraints around the use of fixed-term retirements, post-retirement fixed-term contracts, particularly around objective justification. And this is more of a technical point, that these should be rescinded and that employers should be able to use them. And I'll finish on this. I realize that I am now at my 8 minutes quota. This is an important point, though, in relation to the work of this particular group. Age legislation with no accompanying policies to encourage older work is unlikely to increase participation rates. And research by the SRI suggests that. They draw a big comparison, and indeed Ornia's work bears this out, between the effective retirement age and the contractual retirement age. And when that state pension age was increased, there was no, according to the SRI's research, no impact on effective retirement ages. So there are a number of measures around work scheduling, flexible hours, voluntary work time reductions, phased retirement, different job assignments, etc., which could be introduced to facilitate the productive employment of older workers. Knowing the work of this project, I know this is something that you think about long and hard. So I leave it at that, Nat, and apologies for slightly running over my assigned time.
Thank you, Tony. That was an excellent presentation. And I think there are some very interesting proposals that you've included, particularly this default retirement age, because there is this problem that there is a gap between when people retire and the mandatory retirement age. And I'm sure others will have some comments on that. Now, I'd like to invite Billy Barrett, who is the Senior Industrial Relations Officer with the Financial Services Union. Billy has worked for the FSU for 14 years, representing bank workers in the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Great Britain. He currently has responsibility for negotiations between the union and AIB and has extensive experience on pensions and pension-related agreements. Billy has also worked in the aviation and retail sectors, having 13 years as a chef in the Aer Lingus flight kitchen and a number of years in employee relations in Superquin. Over to you, Billy.
Okay, thank you, Nada. Again, I'll try and share my screen if I can. I've only 4 short slides to kind of give a background in relation to banking and I suppose the main banks in in which we have our membership from, and also the main banks in which our members who participated in the research by Anya. And I'd like to thank Anya for the opportunity to participate in this research, because I think it was very timely, given the SIP2-led Stop 67 campaign during the lead up to the last general election, and this was very timely at that time. So maybe I'll just move on. So I suppose from our perspective, there's been 4 main banks in that we have membership drawn from. We've Allied Irish Bank, Ulster Bank of Ireland, Ulster Bank, and National Irish Bank, who are no longer operating in the Republic of Ireland. And I suppose over the years we would have had industry-led negotiations, and each of the banks would have, I suppose, negotiated with the union on the basis of general terms on pay and pensions. And there was very little differentiation between pay and pensions across the various banks. For those years, many people have had non-contributory defined benefit pension schemes, and would have been gold star pensions, of the time. And banks as well, unlike the majority of people within the private sector, are well covered by were well covered by defined benefit pension schemes. And I suppose prior to protections being brought in by the Pensions Act, members who left employment of the banks left their pension entitlements behind them. And this was especially impactful on female workers who would have left for caring responsibilities, left a bank, may have worked there for 10 or 15 years, and would have left their entitlements to their pension behind them once they left employment. However, now with the enactment of the Pensions Act, they now become deferred members, and their pensions are protected. Normally across banks, the retirement age was 63 or 40-year service, and so you would have joined, you would have become a member of the scheme at age 23. You could have joined the bank before that, but you could have you joined the scheme at age 23, work for 40 years to 63, and retire on full pension. Those who left before normal retirement age would have had an actuarially reduced pension scheme, or they could have left it till their normal retirement date and have the pension entitlements at that time. So, however, currently defined benefit schemes across the industry are closing to new membership. So none of the banks now operate defined benefit schemes for new members. In some of the banks, the DB schemes are closed for current employees. They've held their entitlement to DB, but all future entitlement is on a DC basis. And as a result, also retirement ages are increasing to 65. So we now have a new retirement age across most of the banks of 65, but dependent upon the rules of the scheme, in certain circumstances, people can retire at 63. All new entrants into the banks are coming into the bank on the basis of defined contribution schemes. Now, they are, in some extent, a lot better and would look a lot better than most private sector defined contribution schemes, but again, they are on the basis of defined contribution. There is a trend of moving towards increasing retirement age in some employments, but that is only by agreement. So you can ask to remain beyond 65, and it is by agreement with the employer. However, members usually don't want to remain on an employment. When it's requested, it can be allowed, and it's true, again, as I said, through a discussion with the employer, and it is normally allowed. Some issues for the employers in relation to cost and in relation to trust deed and rules. So if they are in a DB scheme, well, again, the DB sometimes may have to pay out or at age 65, which means the individual could be taxed very highly on both their pension and their salary. But the main issue at this point in time, because of DC elements and DC contributions, employers, because of the amount of money they're having to put in, are reluctant to allow people to remain on. It was from 65 years of age up to 66 doesn't seem to be an issue. However, if the state continued to raise the retirement age up to 68, well, 3 years of continued employment would heap a huge cost on the employer, which we expect then would get some pushback should those numbers become higher than what they currently are. I would see that, as I said, the eligibility to state pension as the defining factor, where people may not have built up enough pension entitlements over their work life, as the reason why they might want to remain on past normal retirement age, and that, from the evidence we have to date, is the only reason people do not have enough saved towards retirement, and that's why they wish to remain beyond it. But there is little or no demand from members at this point in time, so therefore the employers are remaining silent in relation to what they wish to do post retirement age. But again, I suppose just to go back on Tony's comments, if I may, just quickly to say, all of the research that Tony put forward shows putting the onus on the employee to cover for their retirement years. There didn't seem to be any research in terms of what the employer is willing to do to allow their employee to retire at 65 or whatever the age may be. And given that, you know, IBEC represents majority people in the private sector, and the majority of people working in the private sector are not covered by pension schemes. Be interesting to note their view in relation to provision of pensions to allow people to retire at normal retirement ages. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Billy. That was also very important to get this perspective and how it is actually so different depending upon the specific industry you're in. So that's a very important perspective. I'd now like to invite Dr. Edward Matthews, who is the Director of Professional and Regulatory Services with the Irish Nurses and Midwives Organization, where he's worked for 18 years representing nurses and midwives. He is a nurse and lawyer, and in his work in the INMO, he is responsible for professional services, advocacy, and policy, as well as social policy for the organization, which represents 40,000 nurses and midwives in Ireland.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Nata. Also, thank you to Anya, colleagues domestically and internationally for this very important work programme, which I think is important for all of those who we represent in trade unions, but also an important discussion from a policy level and within our society more generally. I'll address you briefly in relation to three contexts for our members who are nurses and midwives working in the public and private sector throughout Ireland. One in relation to the global and domestic context for healthcare workforces, in relation to a workplace context and the important role that older workers play in our particular part of public service, and the individual context for nurses and midwives. There are 65% of nurses in Ireland currently who are over 40 and 30% who are over 50. And that occurs in the context of a current global shortage of nurses and midwives of about 5.9 million. Which places this conversation in a very particular context for us, where there are very particular workplace challenges and workforce challenges, and that creates a demand in itself for workforce presence, and consequently that speaks as to extended working life as well. We also have to understand this in the context of a more changing societal demographic, where we're going to have increasing demands on our health services. For example, 23% of our population will be over 60 by 2026, and as that percentage increases, as the research shows it will, the demands on our health services and workforce challenges will increase as well. We also, and I reflecting on the point that was made earlier about linked lives across the world, we have a linked lives issue and an ethical issue in relation to workforce and the presence in our workforce of nurses and midwives, because we have an undue reliance in this country, and indeed in many other countries similar to Ireland, on a migrant workforce, and there are ethical challenges in placing one's health services reliance predominantly on a migrant workforce in the context of taking skills needed from other countries and the continuing availability of those skills. And we also have to look at this in the context of an intergenerational approach, whereby in service of those who are getting older and being able to make necessary accommodations in the workplace, we have to look to our younger graduates and entrance to the workforce to ensure that we retain those, so that we can maintain intergenerational stability, that we can retain older workers in a way that works for older workers, but in a way as well that we can balance our workforce at the same time. In the workplace context, an older workforce or an aging workforce is not necessarily, and is not indeed, an entirely bad thing. For healthcare professionals, for nurses and midwives, a balanced workforce and a balanced experience level in the workforce present in every unit of care throughout the country, throughout every day of every year, is an exceptionally important safety measure in providing services of general interest to the public in the context of the provision of health services. Older nurses bring with them, and midwives bring with them, necessary experience, necessary skills. They form part of the important skills mix, as we call it, within a given workforce. They are essential for mentoring and educating professionals who are coming after them, and they are particularly important in relation to leadership, guidance and autonomy in the workforce. But the potential for longer working and extended working life is extremely challenging, and Anya outlined a number of those challenges. And it's important, as I think one speaker mentioned already, not to conflate the issues of the increase in the state pension age with extended working life. There are definite intersections between those two issues, but there are very separate issues as well. And there is considerable concern among our members in relation to increased or extended working life. Nursing and midwifery is a highly skilled and cognitively exercised profession, but it is also a hugely physically demanding profession. There are huge physical demands which have taken their toll on nurses and midwives over the years, particularly in circumstances where there was very poor ergonomic design, very poor training, and very laborious physical work associated with the skilled and exceptionally skilled work that exercises nursing and midwifery every day. And that has resulted in, and indeed continues to result in, despite advancements in that area, considerable musculoskeletal injuries among the nursing and midwifery workforce that makes it extremely difficult in some instances to continue working. And you can't ignore either the mental, psychological, or emotional demands that nursing and midwifery brings. And it is quintessentially quite difficult for many nurses and midwives to endure both the physical and mental demands throughout their working career, and then to be expected to extend their working life at the same time. We must also be conscious, should I say, at an individual level of the concept of pension poverty. Now, those working, we represent nurses and midwives working in the public service as well as the private sector. Those in the public service find themselves in a comparatively advantageous position to those in the private sector, many of whom certainly in small healthcare employments would have no access to an occupational pension scheme. But those who have access to an occupational pension scheme are in a comparatively better position. But also we need to look at the gendered aspect of our workforce, which is overwhelmingly female, and consequently it is very few indeed of nurses and midwives who would retire on a full pension, and the potential for pension poverty and the imperative to continue working to avoid poverty in circumstances where one does not have the capability or capacity to do so is something that must be borne in mind, bearing in mind the nature of the work which is undertaken. The approach to this, I think, going forward must embrace both adaptations and concessions, I would say. From the concession point of view, it would be very difficult to conceive, and indeed impossible, for there to be a mandated increase in working for nurses and midwives. But indeed, we must be conscious of and avoid the creation of circumstances of requiring a person to work to an extended working life to avoid poverty. And we must avoid those constructs and circumstances where we must recognize the extraordinary physical and mental demands and the potential for there to be a capacity and capability issue, and that we cannot force people to continue to work when they are not able to do so, because they have rendered so many years of service to our state in the provision of healthcare. In the area of adaptations, I think we need to create financial incentives to encourage, where appropriate, older persons to continue to work, or persons who are aging to continue to work, and flexible working provision with associated protection of loss of superannuation contributions is certainly something which we have seen has borne benefit, but needs to be increased and rolled out, because it allows people to remain in the workforce, provides a financial incentive for persons to remain in the workforce, it serves the individual, and it serves the service and the workforce and the public that are being served, and that is and should remain on a voluntary basis. Flexible work patterns are of extreme importance, and we have to understand, and employers as part of workforce planning must understand, that it is indeed a doom if you say that somebody cannot have flexible working because there are staff pressures, which ultimately then leads to a person leaving, whereas you have a strategy then which says ultimately you're better with zero than half. And consequently, we need to ensure that flexible working patterns, whether that means in relation to shifts, in relation to night duty, are available, and which can help a person who wants to remain in the workforce and who wants to do so in a way that isn't as injurious or laborious for them in the context of a very long working life and diminishing potentially capacity and capability to endure the rigors of what is full-time shift pattern work. I think the communication and acting, the organizational value of older workers in the workplace is something that should be given greater attention. There is a huge repository of skills, knowledge, and other attributes which are of essential benefit to us as a society in terms of maintaining safety in the provision of healthcare, and that should be communicated not only in rhetoric but in actions by employers in valuing the contribution of older workers in the health service. The access to ongoing professional development for older workers is also extremely important and reported on throughout the literature in relation to the retention of older nurses and midwives in the workforce. Obviously, design and ergonomic adaptations are extremely important, particularly for a workforce which faces considerable physical demands as times move forward. As well as that, empowerment and autonomy for older nurses and midwives in the workforce is very important, and addressing the intergenerational issues which can arise in the workforce, recognizing the comparative skill levels, the comparative contributions, and ensuring that they're recognized and articulated in day-to-day work has been shown to be an essential characteristic of creating a workforce where older members of the nursing and midwifery community feel valued in relation to the contribution that they make. In addition, changed work locations and changed roles can contribute to allowing us to maintain nurses and midwives longer in the workforce. But ultimately, what I would say is this is a very valuable piece of work. It is work that is of huge imminent concern to the nursing and midwifery workforce and to health services in the context of general policy and health policy within this jurisdiction. But we must approach it from the perspective of concessions and adaptations, recognizing when a person is no longer able to continue to work because they have, for the entirety of their life, given such service to society, but also recognizing that there is value in persons continuing to work in the workforce for a longer period of time and making it easier for those who wish to do so. Thank you very much. I think you're on mute there, Doctor.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Edward. You really made a very important contribution. I like this idea of the concessions and adaptations, and you've given some very concrete examples of key adaptations that we need to bring into this whole discourse on what we do about increasing state pension age. So thank you so much for that perspective. Now, I would like to invite Nat O'Connor, who is the Senior Public Affairs and Policy Specialist with Age Action. He's also an adjunct lecturer in Maynooth University and has previously taught at Ulster University. He has also worked in Leinster House for the Labour Party as director of the think tank TASK and as a researcher in Dublin's Homeless Agency. Thank you, Nat.
Thank you very much indeed. And thanks for the opportunity to give a perspective from Age Action. Age Action stands for a society that enables all older people to participate and to live full, independent lives. And we want to see equality of outcome for people so that they enjoy healthy aging and active retirement. And that in turn requires decent, secure retirement incomes, access to public services, and a range of other conditions. So Age Action is a member of the Stop 67 Coalition, so it won't be any surprise to you that Age Action was against raising the pension age to 67. But our position is not set in stone. What Age Action wants to see is a fair and flexible retirement system that supports the choices that people make for themselves about retirement from work. And just changing the state pension age is not at all a fair and flexible retirement system. So when we're looking at this issue, we need to look at, what would bring about an adequate and a secure income for people in retirement. And there's things we can do to increase people's incomes, both from private sources as well as from the state, but also to reduce the cost of living. And that's the net total we should be looking at. And there's a number of barriers I want to go through that stop people from having an adequate or secure income in retirement. There's the mandatory retirement clauses, which have been mentioned, that force quite a lot of people to retire at 65. It can disrupt their final payments to a mortgage or loans. It can disrupt them making final savings into a private pension. And of course, it leaves people who do lose their jobs in a very vulnerable position on a low income for a year, which can reduce their savings at precisely the worst time in their life course. There's ageism in the labour market. So we know that for those people who are 55 or older who are unemployed, the majority of them are long-term unemployed for more than a year. So how can we talk about people who are forced to retire at 65, asking them to go out and seek work at 66 and 67, when we know that the majority of those aged 56 and 57 can't actually get steady jobs in the labour market? There's an issue of low pay. Jobs such as retail, security, cleaning simply don't pay enough to allow a person, an older person taking up those jobs, to add any savings or retirement beyond social insurance. It's been touched on as well, how pension inequality affect women in particular. Women who worked in the home raising children can be penalised in terms of lost credits towards the state pension. Those who engage in care duties for older relatives, again, can lose time from paid work. There are some state schemes now which have been developed and refined that take account of this in terms of social insurance contributions, but they don't fully compensate everybody who has been affected. And of course, they don't give people the lost time to make up private savings for retirement. We lack in Ireland evidence about the full cost of living for people who are retired, especially the extra costs associated with illness, disability, housing to an extent. And Age Action has been calling for a comprehensive study to be done to look at the cost of living and the overall cost of retirement, because we need that evidence base to be able to plan a comprehensive retirement system. The state pension, likewise, it's not indexed, and annual increases are political decisions where they should be plugged into more of a formula linked to average wages, linked to the cost of living, so that they're much more reliable for people going forward. Housing costs are another barrier to adequate income in retirement. In particular, there's no provision for secure, affordable, long-term leasing in the private sector. And for a small but a growing number of older people who will be renting privately in retirement. I think it's about 2% in Dublin City now, far less around the country. But that's going to be a growing number of people who don't become homeowners and who become reliant on a private lease. And controlling those prices is going to be essential to manage the cost of living and therefore to define what is an adequate income as we come into retirement. There's also an inadequate quantity of local authority social housing to fill the gap because there simply is a lack of housing. Health and disability create costs, which are, but they're also a barrier to working longer. About 2/3 of people who are age 65 or older will report in surveys that their health is good or very good, which is great. It's a great achievement. But around half would have an underlying health issue, high blood pressure, back disorder, diabetes, which can be barriers to working. Around 1/4 of people age 65 have a disability or serious impairment, and that rises up to 3/4 of people age 90. But in particular, those who worked in manual jobs are more likely to have a disability when they get to the age around in their 60s and will be simply unable to remain in manual work. And there's little opportunity for them to switch into a different career path at that stage. They may only be able to get part-time work on an involuntary basis, can't get full-time hours. So there's quite a sizable cohort of people who will be very badly affected by an increase in the pension age because they simply can't manage to stay in work. And these are often the same people who may have entered the labour force at a younger age and have paid already nearly 50 years of contributions in terms of social insurance. Most employers are still, I think 53% don't offer an occupational pension. And that means that many are not doing anything to help their employees to save for retirement. We also know that former employees don't have any leverage with their former employer when it comes to how their pension funds are managed. That's an issue for quite a number of people. And of course, there is a gender inequality in relation to occupational pensions, as women are more likely to be in occupations, retail, hospitality, or part-time work more generally, where there's less occupational pension coverage. So what Age Action wants to see is a comprehensive retirement policy which tries to overcome all of the barriers that I've mentioned and more to build a fair and flexible retirement system. And so there's a problem with just thinking about the the state pension age. I mean, there's those who are just looking at the state social insurance fund, which pays the pensions. And if you raise the pension age, you can stretch out the amount of money a bit further. But there's no definitive economic or financial analysis published that shows just how much difference that would make. It's likely that the demographic challenges require much larger scale action, and that changing the state pension age may not actually be much of a solution. Obviously, if people are living much longer than they are today, as a society, we're going to have to look at the length of working lives. But we can't really contemplate this at the moment because the focus is just so much in public policy debate on the pension age rather than on this wider question of a comprehensive retirement policy. And so we need to shift that focus. And I mean, it's a great achievement that many of us are living longer. But unfortunately, not everybody lives to 65, but 17% of deaths occur to people under the age of 65. About 40% of deaths occur to people aged 65 to 80. So if we're moving the retirement age steadily up and up, thousands of people who will never achieve retirement age. And if, as a society, there's a sort of a sense that the goalposts will keep shifting, and you do have a cynicism that people think, there'll be no pension for me when I get old, then people won't save for retirement, and that creates a vicious cycle. We have to have a comprehensive pension system that brings people on board and encourages people to save and to prepare for retirement in terms of healthy aging and planning an active retirement. So this overall framework, it also needs to take account of the fact that people in their 60s and 70s make a huge contribution to society and to the economy as investors, as unpaid carers, as grandparents, as volunteers, and in many other ways. And this should be part of the analysis. So just to give you one example, I mean, some grandparents assist greatly in the minding of grandchildren. If they weren't available to do that because they're at work, then those younger adults in the labour force are going to be under pressure for childcare costs. They might have to cut back their own working. And in the long term, that will affect parents' ability to save for retirement. And they might lose again years. So there's a lot of cycles, and so the holistic approach is needed to really take account of the bigger picture. So we certainly do need to meet the challenge of having a much greater number and proportion of our population over the age of 65. This would be a great opportunity to encourage people towards healthy aging and active retirement. But the challenges won't be understood and they won't be overcome if we just focus on the state pension age. We need the holistic analysis of how do we put in place the necessary conditions that will enable people to achieve healthy aging and active retirement. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nat, and underscoring once again the very important message that we need to have a flexible, fair, comprehensive system of retirement, and that the focus on the state, increasing the state age of the pension is one step, but it is not enough, and it has requires the kind of addressing the various barriers that you have outlined. And I particularly like the point that you have said about that we need more analysis on the cost of retirement. What is it to actually live in retirement, and what do people need to ensure that they have economic security and well-being? So thank you very much for your comments. Now I'd like to invite Oscar Vargas Yebe, Research Manager at Eurofound. He's working in the Working Life Unit at Eurofound, which is an EU agency based in Dublin. Originally from Vitoria in the Basque Country of Spain, Oscar manages projects on working conditions and related policies. He specializes in topics related to organization of working time, health and well-being, and aging issues. He's also interested in social and occupational inequalities. Currently, he is applying his background to manage research related to digitalization and working conditions. In this area, he leads Eurofound's projects on telework and the right to disconnect. Before joining Eurofound in December 2009, he worked as a project coordinator in the field of health and safety and was responsible for the professional card scheme for the construction sector in Spain at the non-profit bipartite Fundación Liberal de la Construcción in Madrid. He has an academic background in industrial sociology and holds a diploma in social science research methods from the University of Cardiff and a master's degree on health and safety from Autonomous Community of Madrid region. Oscar, may I invite you to begin your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Nada. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Nada. And I think I don't need to say more about my background. You said it a lot already. And also I want to thank the organizers, Aine, etc., for inviting Eurofound to present some of our findings in relation to aging. As you said before, Eurofound is the European Agency for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions. We are based in Dublin. It's one of the 27 or more decentralized agencies of the European Union. And my area of research, as you mentioned before, focus on working conditions, and that will be my presentation about will be working conditions in relation to age and what could be the implications for working longer. I will try to share it because I have some slides. This one. Second. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, can you? Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to present the findings of our project that we developed before the pandemic on working conditions of workers on different ages. This research project was developed in the context of the EU policy about making pension systems sustainable. And of course, we as Eurofound wanted to provide an input to the EU institutions about what is the role of working conditions of helping, helping workers to stay in the labor market or even extending the working life. This report looks at factors which promote or inhibit sustainable work over the life course. Also, differences in working conditions from the life course perspective by occupation. You mentioned the example of nurses and healthcare workers, and this is very important because depending on the occupation of the worker, the working life can be somehow affected, and they might be more able or willing to prolong the working life or not. And finally, I will show you some findings about sustainable work at country level. By sustainable work, we mean that work that contributes to have well-being and good working conditions throughout the working life, and therefore can also contribute to have a longer working life. This research, before I continue, of course, looks at EU level. So maybe it's going to be somehow quite abstract compared to some of the examples and specific issues that you mentioned before. And I want to start with the European Pillar of Social Rights, which says that workers have the right to a working environment adapted to their professional needs, and which enables them to prolong their participation in the labor market. This is a policy framework in the European Union that has to be implemented at lower level and at a specific policy with a specific policy initiatives, either at EU level or national level. So, but why workers stop working at the age, when they have the opportunity to do that, or when they reach certain age? we see that the majority of them, it is because they have reached the eligibility for pension. So being eligible for pension rights is the big contributor to stop working. However, there are some aspects that I highlighted in orange, which are somehow directly or indirectly related to working conditions. We have up to 20% of workers leave the labor market because of health reasons or disability. Also, considerable amount of workers leave the labor market because they don't have, the prospects, the job prospects, the possibility to find, a good job, for example. But also there are a number of workers that leave the labor market up to 4% because of family and care-related reasons. And here, policies related to working time flexibility can play an important role in keeping them in the labor market. And finally, there are other job-related issues that I will explain now. So what are the factors contributing to good working conditions and at the same time contributing to sustainable work and keeping all the workers in the labor market? The first one is the work-life balance, one of the main outcomes. The second is health, and the third is job prospects. And what aspects of the working conditions are related to these outcomes that contribute to keep workers in the labor market? So we have already mentioned the working time flexibility, but also the quality of management and support from colleagues are very important for having a good work-life balance. And those aspects that prevent having a good work-life balance are high level of job demands that was also already mentioned in some of the presentations in the health sector, and long hours. These are aspects that don't contribute to prolonged working life. For example, in relation to health, of course, the psychological well-being, having work-life balance, and also this, as you see, some of the aspects are repeated, are good for both work-life balance and health. At the end, they contribute also to sustainable work. But aspects like not only high level of job demands, but adverse social behavior, harassment, etc., or having a high level of physical risks, as it was already mentioned before, are not too good for keeping workers in the labor market. But finally, prospects of aspects like employability, job security, having a good training and job security, stability in the contractual arrangement contribute also to keep workers in the labor market. So this is aspects in red which we have to avoid. If we want to have a sustainable work throughout the working life, and then having workers willing to continue working, after the standard retirement age. But let's now shift the focus to the occupational differences. We found that generally speaking, at EU level, mid and low level occupations present worse working conditions over the life course. But there are exceptions, of course. I'm not going to mention them here. You have the report that you are interested in going more in depth on some of the findings I'm presenting. You have the opportunity always on our website. Also, another finding is the accumulation throughout the working life of poor working conditions results in poor outcomes at older age. So workers experiencing throughout the working life those conditions that I mentioned in red, then the situation at older age is much worse. And finally, lower occupational levels are associated with poorer health and a stronger deterioration with age. That is the importance of looking at what occupation we're talking about. Just graphically to show differences by occupation. We see here, the main occupational groups, of course, and we see that there are differences. Look at the green part of this graph. There are workers saying that work impacts mainly negatively on health. We have, for example, higher share of workers reporting this among plant and machine operators compared to managers. And you see that there are differences between the groups of workers, but mainly those lower level occupations have more negative impact of work on health. And here I want to mention also that I'm not showing this in a slide, but we have in the report also a category when we go more in depth of health professionals. Okay, health professionals include both nurses and doctors, and we'll see that exceptionally for this group of workers, if you compare to other professionals, occupations at this level, have higher impact of work on health compared to, I don't know, other occupations, teachers, for example, etc. So it's a group of workers, the nurses and doctors, that experiencing higher level of impact work on health, negative impact compared to the same occupational levels. And also here we see differences in terms of the ability to work until 60. We ask workers whether they feel they are going to be able to work at 60 age. And we see that, some occupations, higher level occupations, there's a higher share of workers saying that, yes, we are going to be able to work when we are 60. But in most occupations also, we see that this percentage drops when they reach 50 years old. So at 50 years of age in this decade, workers tend to be more pessimistic about working until 60. And this is probably of some of the experiences they have at work, and also, I don't know, the possibility to retire sooner. In the next slide, I'm going to shift now my presentation to country level. We identify, we use some indicators related to health, well-being, work-life balance, job security, and employability. And we rank European countries through these all indicators that contribute to sustainable work. And from this, we built a sustainable work index. And interestingly, we see that Ireland is the country best placed in terms of these indicators. I mean, this is an average, okay? I'm not talking about the health sector now. This is a country average. Of course, I don't want to raise a discussion about this, but just even if there's some nuances or statistical issues here, we can tell really that Ireland is one of those countries in Europe with better sustainable work throughout the life course. And when we look at sustainable work and how long workers work throughout the working life, we see that there is some correlation. It's not perfect, but we see that generally speaking, we can tell that really working conditions contribute to sustainable work, and sustainable work at the same time contributes to have longer working life, higher number of years of working life. And we see here that, for example, Ireland on the right side of this graph, we see that have a high level of sustainable work, score very high. So in principle, there is a potential. This is always talking at EU level and an average, okay, statistically, has a potential to increase the years of working life. Again, I'm talking at national level, not at central or occupational level now. Further, if we compare to the situation at EU level more graphically in the map of Europe, we see that the duration of working life in Ireland is similar to countries like France or Spain. And interesting, and I want to highlight here that the institutional settings are very important. So it's not only working conditions, of course. It is the possibilities to retire. It is the pension system, how it's organized, the pension rights, the standard of living in each country. Because we see that, for example, in countries like Poland, for example, have very low number of years in terms of working life, but they all see. Yes.
Can I interrupt just 1 more minute? Could
yes, in 1 minute I'm done. Thank you. However, and also at the same time, they have very low score on sustainable work. whereas other countries like Estonia, we see that they have rather long duration of working life, but low level of sustainable work. And this is because in this country, workers try to prolong the working life to make ends meet, when they retire. So there are very different circumstances, but we can conclude that working conditions play a role in extending working life and keeping workers in the labor market. So my final slide before I conclude, it is this one. We also ask workers before the pandemic whether they want to work as long as possible. I think this is a very good indicator to take into account when you plan the pension system and retirement age. And we see here that in this graph, Ireland, in Ireland, around 15–16% of men say that they want to work as long as possible, whereas women only, well, around 14%, no big difference, but there's some difference there. And this is very much, Ireland is at the same, very close to the EU level. But we see what are the differences between countries. I mentioned before the example of Estonia, a higher percentage, of people willing to prolong their working life. Even the working conditions are not as good as in Ireland, but a huge variety across the European Union. So this is going to be my last slide, and just some conclusions. So better working conditions contribute to prolonged working life and enable participation in the labor market. So that contributes to the European social pillar of rights. And this holds true for all ages. So we need to have good working conditions at all ages, okay? Even though there are differences in working conditions by age, we have to promote good working conditions throughout the working life. So, and it is important also in relation to psychosocial risks, and not only in relation to physical risks. Special attention has to pay to low-level occupations, and also some occupations at a higher level that have more problematic conditions, like health workers. Institutional settings are very important, of course, not only working conditions. And finally, we have to take into account what the changes in the world of work are bringing to this debate of sustainable work and pensions, and thinking about digitalization, the low carbon economy transition, etc. So thank you very much. I'm sorry if I've been a bit longer.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much. And I think it's a very important point that you've brought about looking at sustainable work. That's an important concept that often is not talked about in this debate. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Senator Mary Sherlock, who's unfortunately unable to be here, but has taken the time to record her message. Senator Mary Sherlock is the Irish Labour Party politician who has been a senator for the Labour panel since April 2020. She has a long history of working on employment issues, particularly very active in the issue of precarious workers, and has formerly worked with SIPTU. And we have a recorded message. So can we please play that?
Hello, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. And I'm very sorry that I cannot be there in person or indeed virtually over Zoom. I very much look forward to reading the findings of Dr. Nata Duvvury's research into workers in the health sector and in the financial services. I think really important work as to the impact of an extended working life in those sectors. And of course, I'm mindful that this conversation takes place at a time where we are expecting the Commission on Pensions to report this month or sometime over the coming weeks. And of course, we have also seen the government's introduction of their benefit payment for 65-year-olds in February this year. And now I must state, and certainly my party, the Labour Party, was very critical of the move at the time because it amounted to no progress from what, as we saw it from, as we see it from what is currently in existence. Certainly, there is no improvement in the payment rate for those who have found themselves having to retire at 65 and having to sign on for job seekers benefit, and the exemption from needing to seek work was already in place anyway. So we're extremely disappointed with that, but nonetheless, we do look forward to the outcome of the recommendations from the Commission on Pension. I think the other thing that's important to say as well today is that we're mindful as well that the auto enrolment has yet again be postponed. It is going to be yet again postponed, and of course, I remember as somebody who newly came into my role in SIPTU 2007, the Green Paper on Pensions published then, and it, you know, talked about a new dawn of auto enrolment in this country, bringing Ireland up to speed indeed, but, you know, alongside other countries. And of course, 14 years later, we still do not have, we're not any closer to auto enrolment. And of course, that is the key to resolving the pension sustainability funding crisis in this country. So I suppose it just with regards to the question of the state pension age and whether it should be increased or not, I think it's important for us to say and for it to be acknowledged that raising the state pension age is not and cannot be a strategy in itself for improving the long-term sustainability of pensions. I think there's a limit to the amount of age increases that can ever take place, but more importantly, increasing the age of state pension reflects no recognition or acknowledgement of the different types of workers who are actually at work at the age of 65, or the type of work that they do. And indeed, you know, I very much believe, and my party very much believes, that a one-size approach does not fit all. So in the comments today, I want to very briefly just say, I suppose, three things. And I suppose I'm very hopeful that the Commission on Pensions is looking at this in their own work. So the first thing is in terms of the impetus for change. And of course, there are very clear concerns with regards to how we fund adequate pension coverage over the coming decades. But it's important that we don't over-exaggerate how bad the situation is in this country. And I'm very concerned about the crudeness of the dependency ratio as a measure of how affordable or otherwise or our capacity to be able to finance pensions into the future. I think a very bleak view has been taken about the decline of the working age population, that if we have a decline in the working age population, that we'll see that obviously labour is a factor of production. If that declines, that we're going to see proportionate declines in potential growth in living standards. And I think that ignores the reality that we don't know or that we know that labour force participation rates, that age is not necessarily a good proxy for capacity or indeed incapacity to work. And secondly, it ignores potential growth contribution from technological advances in future years. I think the second thing that we need to say is that there's a lot of focus on those who are at work at the moment and an insufficient focus on the potential labour supply in this country. So pre-pandemic, we had an unemployment rate amongst the potential labour supply of 19%, an average of 19% in 2019. And so we need to look at the factors of the thousands of people out there who want to work but cannot work because of the structural barriers in their life, whether it is disability, whether it is access to childcare, whether it is help with regards to elder care, or indeed the many other structural barriers that people in this country who would like to work but are not actively seeking work because of those structural barriers are facing. And I think that number of 19% is an extraordinarily high proportion, and something that needs to be seriously addressed. if we are to ensure the affordability of pensions into the future and get more people into the labour force, to ensure that that dependency ratio is improved over time. I think the second key point to make is that we need to look at the impact of pension changes on the labour force and who's actually in the labour force. And we know that the labour force participation rate of those who are aged 60 to 64 is just over 50%, on around 54-55%. So it reflects that there's a very sharp fall off in employment from the age of 55 in this country, and we need to understand the reasons behind that. And of course, of those who are still in the workforce, aged between 60 and 64, we know a fifth are in skilled trades. Now, of course, a large share of that is taken up by those in farming roles, but the key issue is that those who are in physically to tasking roles and occupations, what is their capacity to be able to continue working beyond the age of 65? And the third key point I wanted to make is with regards the impact of pension age, of an increase in the pension age on workers themselves. And the international evidence is not at all clear-cut as to the labour supply impact and health impact of raising the pension age. And I think it's vital that we seriously engage with that, because we know that from some ESRI research undertaken a number of years ago that an increase in the pension age did not lead to a proportional increase in the numbers staying on at work, from 65 to 66. So, the arguments that sometimes are used to promote or to cast away any concerns about higher pension age, to say that the higher pension ages, will lead to higher well-being. And a higher and a longer life. Well, I don't think the international evidence is certainly proven with regards to that. And interestingly, what we have seen is that in Finland and in Germany, where older workers were actually enabled to work longer, it kind of gave rise to a perverse effect that they actually curtailed or pulled back their working hours. So I think, to conclude, I think to me and to the Labour Party, increasing the working age is not a viable strategy. One size all should not be the approach, and in particular we need to take account of who's actually in the labour force and working at the age of 65 and 66. We need to take account of the physical nature of their work, and we need to have a much more nuanced and comprehensive approach to ensuring pension adequacy and coverage in the years to come.
So I wanted to now just see if we have a few minutes for a brief question and answer session. And I mean, Senator Sherlock has really made another important point, which is that we also need to think about some of these macro variables, so the potential labor supply. If there's 19% of unemployment, long-term unemployment, there is something that still the system needs to address to bring in potential workers, not only about concern about that there's aging and therefore that there's a crisis for the country as a whole. And this really relates to 2 points that have been raised in the chat by Joe Lagri. The first is, he says that demographic aging per se will still have a comparatively limited impact on sustainability of pensions. And the second point that he makes is that the two-tier system of pension provision needs to be named as a key public cost factor in Ireland's pension challenge. So I turn to the panelists to see your comments on the points that Joe has made. Shall we begin with Tony? Oh, Tony, I'm sorry, Tony has to leave. So would Edward or Nat or Billy, would you like to begin?
Well, I think in relation to, I'm not clear what exactly is meant by the two-tier pension system. It may be that the public service has a pension scheme and there isn't an auto-enrollment scheme in the private sector. There have been very substantial reforms in the public sector and pension scheme. The scheme was substantially changed in 2013 to a career averaging scheme, and as well as that, the increases in the increases in the pension over years is not linked any longer to, will not be linked any longer to the grade from which one retired. That will reduce by about 20 billion the liability of the overall liability. Now, one must as well, in relation to pension liabilities, reflect upon the numbers in employment in the public service who are continuing to contribute to the scheme versus how much is being paid out. And if one operates on a presupposition, for example, I'll just take the health service as an example, that it's going to get bigger rather than smaller, you'll actually have the same amount of people or more paying into the schemes or drawing out of the scheme. So that will be a oh, I see, Joe, sorry, my apologies. He meant private sector supplementary pensions more generally and tax expenditure discounts. I apologize, sorry, I misunderstood the question. In terms of the demographic changes, again, Senator Sherlock addresses that issue in the context of changing labour market conditions and the number of people contributing versus not, and the overall population situation. So I wouldn't disagree with Mr. Larraghy in that regard. I think what is important is that we develop a sustainable model across, as contributors have already said, across the economy. And my main concern, quite frankly, is we have a situation, if I look a bit broader than my own church, of vast numbers of people who don't contribute, for example, to any occupational pension scheme and have no access to an occupational pension scheme, and trying to ensure that they have a retirement where they can afford to live in that retirement, and making inroads in relation to that. And the more that are contributing, of course, increases liability, but also increases contributions, and to have an equitable situation. And I think it was the person who opened the session this morning that referred to equity as a key value, which should underpin all of our discussions in relation to this issue. And I think that is the key concern going forward, both currently and into the future. How are we going to make equitable provision across our society for people to be able to live a retirement that has value and that they're not caught in a trap of pension poverty, which it's all well and good, I think, to speak of a valued and fruitful retirement, but there's no value in fruitful retirement if you're worried about how you're going to pay the rent and you're going to worry about how you're going to pay for basic utilities in life. And I think your contributor from Age Action Ireland spoke rather expertly on that matter earlier on.
Absolutely. And so Nat, would you like to make any, have any comments on the point raised?
Thank you. I suppose the perhaps more general comment, I mean, I'm struck by the DAISIE project. It's the dynamics of accumulated inequalities. And if we think about healthy aging, the World Health Organization, their view is very much that people's health in older age is affected by their childhood experiences, their working life experiences, and so on. And so that bigger holistic view, I think, is very important. And to come back to Dr. Joe Larraghy's questions about the two-tier health system, pension system, we have constructed different policies for different parts of the system, but we haven't brought them together in a whole. So we have private tax breaks where 80% of the benefit goes to the top 20% of earners. And while it encourages them to save for their own retirement, but the cost of that is very high, because, for example, if for 10 years somebody could save €100,000 and not pay tax on that, and they can have that as a tax-free lump sum, and they never pay tax on it. So that's an extraordinarily large block of money. In fact, it could be €200,000, and yet most workers won't benefit from that. So there's an accumulation of advantages through the current pension tax relief setup that benefits some workers, whereas other workers, as other speakers have said, will accumulate health problems as they go through their working lives, will find it very difficult to physically work beyond their 60s. And if we want to have I suppose, again, the end goal of all this, we're encouraging all of our citizens, all of our people living in Ireland to save for retirement, to look after their health. That's got to be the key message. And if at the same time the government is talking about raising the pension age, moving the goalposts further and further away, that discourages people from saving for retirement. It also confuses people about, you know, what their entitlements are, what will their pension income be. I mean, it's surprising the amount of people who come to their retirement and they don't know what their income is going to be because they've never worked it out. Both their occupation pension, if they have one, private pension, savings, state pension. So we need to do an awful lot more about bringing all this together into a policy. And it has to be driven by a sense of fairness, that we're trying to get everybody across the line, not just the better off workers, not just those who are in better health. And that is currently lacking because retirement policy is so piecemeal and fragmented in different ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Billy, you also wanted to come in?
Yes, if I could, yeah. I suppose and unfortunately Tony is not here to speak from the employer's perspective, but just going back to his earlier presentation, it really, you know, the research that they done only looked at the state retirement age and what that meant for employers and not what it meant for employees. And also, I suppose I was trying to make the point that, you know, Tony works for IBEC, who represent people in the private sector, and the private sector is notoriously badly served by pensions. And you know, so a lot of those employers who were, I suppose, surveyed through it would not be providing pensions for their employees. So I think, you know, there has to be, and Nat made a point. It has to be an overall approach. It can't be just raising the retirement age in the absence of doing other issues, in the absence of proper pension provision for employees. You know, even Oscar's presentation showed that where people could afford to retire at their normal retirement age, they retired. And, you know, that's because they had proper pension provision. So I think, you know, to just raise the state retirement age because the demographics don't allow for you know, proper provision, that's not the answer. The answer is proper provision over their period of employment, and the employer cannot and should not be allowed to hide from their responsibilities to provide such provision. And also, we see from our you know, views of the defined contribution pension schemes, there are a lot of our DC pension schemes allow for employer contribution and then matched employee contributions. So if, for instance, in the AIB scheme, the employer puts in 10% into the scheme, and then depending upon age, you can match up to 2%, 5%, and 8%. In the vast majority of circumstances, we see employees not being able to match the employer contribution on the basis of affordability, and so we need to look at how that bridge can be gapped. The other situation is, if we look at and the senator made comment in relation to the pausing of the auto enrollment proposals in relation to pension provision as well, and that auto enrollment allows for the proposals that were being discussed allowed for the auto enrollment of employees into pensions and the auto enrollment of employers and contributions from employer, government, and employee. And where there was affordability issues, the employee could opt out, but then were auto enrolled again after a certain period of time. And that is useful as well in allowing for affordability. I think the main issue in all of this is first of all, people should be able to afford to retire when they wish. And also then, if they wish to remain on unemployment, that should be also allowed also. So it should be about, you know, whether, you know, people can do it or can't, not about affordability. And we should be putting in place proper pension provision to allow for people to retire at an age. And if they want to remain on and work, let them remain on and work where they're able to and willing to. That should be allowed also. And I think, you know, we all have a part to play in that provision of proper pensions for people.
Yes, I would fully agree. And I think we are actually in quite a bit of agreement across this panel about the need for a comprehensive system that is fair, that recognizes that retirement is something that should be a choice, and a choice because you can actually afford to do it, not a coerced choice that you have to go or you have to work because you have no other choice. So it has to be a choice. And so that's a very important point. I think there's also another question on auto-enrollment, which all of us have highlighted. And it's particularly because it's now from 2007 till now, auto-enrollment has not been instituted in Ireland. And so where does the problem lie? Why have we not been able to make progress on this? And what can employers associations and unions do to press for the urgent implementation of auto-enrollment?
Maybe I'll come back in on that one. Again, I sit on the private sector committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and we have been pushing for this the auto-enrollment, and have been pushing to to ensure the employees get a fair crack of the whip in relation to getting the employer to contribute and get the government to contribute, and that way making it a more rounded approach. The legislation needs to go through government, and I suppose with I don't want to make any excuses for any government, but I suppose the COVID pandemic is putting everything on the back burner at this point in time. But I think this is something that needs to be done now. The Stop 67 campaign held off on the increase to the retirement age to 67. That's only one element, as we said earlier, and everyone is agreement on it. The pressure needs now put on government to ensure that this auto-enrollment, along with other policies in relation to provision of housing for people in their older age as well, all these matters are social matters that need to be put on the agenda for government. We, through the trade union movement, as the Irish Congress of Trade Unions are our biggest, we are putting pressure through our political moves to try and get this auto-enrollment in. Again, I suppose it's government that put it on the back burner, but we're only one cog in the wheel. Not through through his influences, through the age action and everything else. All these people can help to put pressure on government to bring about that provision for a later period. So.
Yes, absolutely. Now, or Edward?
Well, yeah, I'd echo Billy's. Our own organisation through the Congress of Trade Unions would be lobbying extensively for the auto-enrollment. The block is very simple. The block is, I admire Billy's concession perhaps to the government, to the COVID-19 delayed matters, and Billy's a good colleague, and I know he's worked very hard on this in the Congress of Trade Unions, and he's right. There has been a delay, but I think the delay is a bit more than COVID-19. It is a political will issue, and Billy expresses the matter absolutely correctly. It does require concerted action on behalf of trade unions, which is ongoing through the Congress of Trade Unions, through the National Labour Economic Forum. That pressure is being applied as well. There is a requirement though as well for employers to come and say that they want this and that they welcome it. We saw some research from IBEC earlier on, and Billy has reflected on that. But one of the notable things that I did see is that a good proportion of employers agreed as well to increased PRSI contributions, not only from employees, but from employers as well. Now, what employers need to do is nail their colours to the mast and say that they have an interest in an equitable and fruitful and healthy retirement for the workers who facilitate employments to actually exist and to provide services and to generate profits. They need as well to apply pressure. And of course, there's always a role for broader civil society, but ultimately the blockage is a lack of political will at present and over a particular period of time. There is, of course, a lag in many areas as a result of the public health emergency, but in reality, progress has been slow. We are an outlier in this regard, and it does require concerted efforts, which are ongoing already from the trade union movement, but also from employers. That will be the big push, and that is what is crucial in many politicians' mind to moving this forward. But it shouldn't be a blockage, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that it's not.
Okay, thank you very much. Nat, do you have anything to add, or shall we?
I suppose just two quick observations. One, I suppose, is one of the reasons why auto-enrollment didn't happen after 2007 is, of course, the economy collapsed in 2008, and there was a bit of a hiatus. But the other factor, which I think is relevant to how we might see this proceed, is that the government is currently looking at resuming national social dialogue, which is something that has been paused. Essentially, there are employer trade union negotiations facilitated by the government, there are national economic dialogue, but they're on a lower level than what occurred in the past. And the government is looking at perhaps a stronger national social dialogue. I have heard that the leaders of both the Congress of Trade Unions and the Employers Confederation speaking out in favour of social dialogue, and indeed Age Action is a member of the Community and Voluntary Pillar, which is also enthusiastic to see new structures and indeed reformed structures put in place. But talking about the retirement age is exactly the kind of topic that works in national social dialogue, because it affects everybody and it requires all of society to move and to make changes, sometimes difficult changes such as increases to social insurance payments, which are not popular, but it's a mechanism which is now perhaps coming back, and if it does come back, it provides a mechanism through which issues like the retirement system could be teased out and discussed, and things like auto-enrollment could be advanced through that structure.
Yes, and thank you very much for this. Was a very rich discussion, and I think there's a lot of consensus. It's just about getting us all together to move forward in action. I'd like to now invite Anya to come back and conclude the entire workshop.
Okay, thanks very much, Nata. Yeah, I am unmuted, which is great. So thanks very much to all the panelists. It's been really, yeah, I agree. It has been a great discussion, and yeah, moving out from to a broader consideration of extended working life, which is, yeah, a very holistic concept and needs to be addressed in that way. So I'd just really like to thank all the participants who took part in the research, the stakeholder organizations who supported recruitment and participated. And thanks to Maggie O'Neill, who's conducted fieldwork and analysis, to Nikki and Natalie for leading the international program. Thanks to Kieran for supporting the research at ICSG, and to Nata for supporting the research, but also for running the policy roundtable today. And I'd especially like to thank all of the presenters and panelists, including the President, for taking part in the webinar, and to David Brandt and Michael Nestor for their technical support, and to the funders again. And a huge thank you to Christine Delargy for her excellent organisation and her unfailing support throughout the project. So just thank you again. I really enjoyed it, the event myself. So, and we'll be in touch with you with all the panelists in the future. So if anybody has any queries, they can email us or contact us at icsg.ie. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Nata.
Thank you, Anya.